Hi everybody, hope you're having a good night. This is What's It To You with Carter and Jack. The World Cup is now 2 days old, but we don't blame you if you don't exactly know what's going on just yet. That's why we're here. We're giving you pick-by-pick, game-by-game coverage of every group in this year's World Cup. It's the What's It To You last-minute World Cup preview, and it starts right now. Welcome again to all of you from Columbia High School Studio 1A. This is What's It To Ya. I'm Carter Woodiel alongside Jack Worth. We are talking strictly World Cup on this week's show, the world's biggest event in sports. It's already started, Jack. I know you're extremely excited to watch this tournament.
Absolutely. And it's a tournament, as you say, it's just begun a couple days ago, but really, this is a tournament that's been going on for the last 2.5 years. Nearly every country across the globe sends a team at least to the early rounds of qualification, and this is the culmination of really a journey that began for some of these teams in early 2012.
We're going to go group by group. If you don't know how it's structured, the World Cup has 8 different groups with 4 teams each, and the top 2 advance to the knockout round of 16. Let's start with Group A. Brazil, Mexico, Croatia, and Cameroon. Who are your 2 that advance?
I mean, obviously Brazil stands out, as I'm sure it does for everyone. That's not just the favorite to win this group, favorite to go a long way, maybe win the whole cup. Cameroon, on the opposite end of the spectrum, probably going to come in 4th. So that leaves Mexico and Croatia, 2 teams fighting for 1 spot. Mexico, if you looked a couple years ago, was a team that had such high expectations. It was a group of really young, exciting players, and over the course of qualification, I mean, underwhelming is an absolute overstatement.
Absolutely.
They came very, very close, 1 game away in New Zealand from missing the World Cup entirely. That being said, I like them to actually go out and beat Croatia and advance to the next round.
I'm with you here. I mean, Mexico is extremely, extremely fortunate to be put in the easy Group A, because if they were matched up against an exciting team, an upstart team, you're right. I would definitely say that they would sit out just because the qualifying was so poor, uncharacteristically poor, especially at home at Azteca for this Mexican team. But I think they're better than Croatia. I think they're better than Cameroon. I think they get the 2nd spot in Group A.
And I agree. And it's something to bring up how, it's a team that characteristically is unbeatable at home. And you say, this is a World Cup on South American soil. They're not a home team, but, it's not as if they're playing in Europe or like 4 years ago in South Africa. Maybe they have a bit of an advantage, but they were just so poor in qualifications in Azteca. You don't know how much that's going to affect them.
Let's move on to Group B now. The 4 competitors, Spain, Chile, Holland, and Australia. Who you got?
Once again, we have one team that looks like they stand above the rest. That's Spain. Another team that you can expect to sulk below, and that's Australia. So again, you have Chile and Holland, 2 very different teams. We're
Very
talking about
intriguing teams, both of them.
both of them for 2 very intriguing teams, because you've got the Netherlands, who 4 years ago were 10 minutes away from possibly taking home the trophy.
Yep.
But 2 years ago fails to win a game at the European Championships.
It's a really interesting story just because of that dynamic. The Netherlands are so intriguing because it seems like they can be one of the best teams in the world, and they can be vastly underperforming, and we don't exactly know which team is going to show up come this World Cup. This is not a good draw for them, though. I mean, if the Netherlands had a better draw, I think it's a little bit of a reverse of what we saw with Mexico. If they had a better draw, we'd really have better expectations for them, but they drew 2 really difficult teams in Spain and Chile in this group.
They really did, and you're going back to the fact where you have 2 Netherlands teams. It's absolutely true. So you don't know who you're going to get, but from my perspective, I think the team that we're going to see on the field this year in 2014 is going to be more similar to the 2012 underperforming team that went to the European Championships. I don't think it's similar to the team that we saw in South Africa 4 years ago, and for that reason, even if they perform slightly better, which I think we all can expect from them, it's going to take a really strong effort to get past Chile.
Group C, Colombia, Japan, Ivory Coast, and Greece. A really intriguing group.
Absolutely, and I think if you're an Ivory Coast fan, I don't know how many West African viewers we get on the show, but if you're a fan of the Ivory Coast, it's a team that for the last 8 years we've been talking about as these are this is the team to beat in Africa. And 2006 and 2010 they were put in the toughest group in the World Cup. They still never made it out of the group stage, and even in the African Cup of Nations have always underperformed. But it seems like this is the year. This might not be their best team, but by far this is their best draw. Against Colombia, Japan, and Greece when we're talking about getting out of the group stage.
I agree with you on everything you said about Cote d'Ivoire, but I think this group, I think Colombia is the clear number one. But I think I'm more excited for Japan than you are in this group. I think it's kind of an instance of a team that can beat anybody and can lose to anybody, and that's magnified by the fact that this group, other than Colombia at the top, is pretty much wide open. Greece is a strong club as well. I think that Japan's going to have the attack. It's going to have the exciting play required to make it past the group stage here.
Really, Japan. It's like you said, it's a team that we don't know we're gonna get. They can beat anyone. Almost on the complete other side of the coin is Greece, which is a team that plays a very stout defensive style. They can maybe not beat anyone, but they can draw with anyone purely because of the fact that any game they have a chance to hold you scoreless.
Yeah.
They can play any game and record a clean sheet and draw 0-0, maybe even scrape out a 1-0 win. So it's a Greece team that, again, you can't count out. Personally, though, I disagree with you. I'm not going with Japan or Greece. I do think Cote d'Ivoire will take home that second spot behind Colombia. Like we agree, will win the group. So I think that absolutely, we've talked about Group A and B. We sort of know, the foundation of what's going to happen. But I think Group C is definitely the first group we've talked about that we really don't know. From 1 to 4, I think the spots could really move around.
Group D, another interesting group. Uruguay, Italy, England, and Costa Rica. If it weren't for Costa Rica, this would be surely the group of death in the World Cup. Who do you like here?
And if it wasn't for Group G, which, this
Right.
I'd point to this, even with Costa Rica saying this is the toughest group in the World Cup, because what you do have is you have 3 world-class teams who, in their fan base's mind, all have potential to reach, a semifinal stage. And for one of them, that's not going to happen. They're not going to make it out of the group. And this is an unpopular pick. When I told you this pick, you were surprised. I have England advancing over Italy, Uruguay topping the group, and that means that Italy's going home after just 3 games.
You have England over Italy.
I have England over
I'm
Italy.
really very surprised by that because I feel like this English team is heading. It's got a squad of players. It seems like it has the older generation that's heading out, a newer generation that's coming in, and I feel like this just isn't this isn't their time because the older generation is gone, and the newer generation isn't quite ready for this stage, isn't quite ready to go up against Italy and Uruguay, 2 powers that are inevitable, it seems. So I really disagree with you. I've got Uruguay and Italy 1-2. I've got Italy topping the group just because I'm not convinced that Luis Suarez is perfectly healthy right now. If he was, I'd have Uruguay up there, but I'm leaving England out.
And I think I agree to an extent with everything you said about England. But when I look at this Italian team, it is a team with weaknesses.
Yeah.
I think I put more weight on the qualifying stages than maybe others do because I think when we're talking about international football, where there's not much of a sample size to look from, you have to look at these qualifiers.
And it's spread out over a long time, though.
But it's an Italian team that was put in an easy qualification group, but struggled with Denmark. They drew to Denmark. They struggled at home to the Czech Republic and Bulgaria. So, again, you can take qualifiers as you will. Maybe a game a year and a half ago against Bulgaria and against the Czech Republic, I don't know how much that holds weight in 2014 in Brazil, but personally, the squad I saw for Italy in the qualifiers was not an inspiring squad, especially when they're going to go up against teams like England and Uruguay.
I'm not exactly inspired by England though either, but this is a group that I cannot wait to watch, and I'm sure all of the English fans will be very excited by your pick to knock off Italy. But it's hard for me to see the Italian team going home. Group D is a very, very tough group, and Group E couldn't be weaker as it looks right now. France, Switzerland, Ecuador, Honduras. Who do you have winning?
I think France, it says a lot about this group when France, who I think is a flawed team on a lot of levels.
Yes.
Whether or not they win the group, which they probably will, at this point, they are a lock to move on to the round of 16. This grouping of 4 teams is the only way I could have seen before the draw that Ecuador and Honduras both have legitimate chances to move on to the next round, and that Switzerland is favored to do so.
Right, that's the real thing. I mean, we're going to talk about the USA and their group in a little bit later in the show, but I think Switzerland is kind of the reverse of what happened to the United States. The USA was the promise was building, they had the long winning streak, they come in, and they get blindsided by an awful draw. And I think the reverse happened with Switzerland. They didn't really have much of any expectations, as you said, coming into this World Cup, but all of a sudden, this easy draw, and they are favored to be second place in this group. I have them moving on with France topping.
And, I agree. And, even when you look at Switzerland, it's a team that in qualifiers, again, didn't perform particularly well. They almost backed into the World Cup. They had an easy qualification group as well. But, when you look at who they're going to be up against, Ecuador and Honduras, that's 2 wins for Switzerland. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think they can grab 6 points from those 2 games, and then regardless of what they do against France, they are through on to the next round.
If only the USA could have a group. I'm sure Jurgen Klinsmann is so unhappy to see those guys facing off. Group F is next on the list: Argentina, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Nigeria, and Iran. Another very intriguing group.
This is an intriguing group, 1 through 4. I mean, Iran's a team that I don't think is going to move on past this round, but it's a team that's it's an interesting case because I do think they are a team that has talent. But I mean, the sweethearts of the 32, the sweethearts of the tournament is Bosnia-Herzegovina. It's their first appearance. They've come agonizingly close 4 years ago and even 8 years ago. And as much as I would like to move them on to the next round because they do have a really strong squad, I am a big believer in the Super Eagles of Nigeria. They're the most recent winners of the African Cup of Nations. And I really like this Nigeria team to beat out Bosnia, move on to the round of 16.
And of course, we agree that Argentina is going to top this group. Bosnia-Herzegovina, they're the only first-timers in this year's field. And I think they have what it takes to knock off Nigeria and advance to this group stage. I think they have the talent. I think they're hungry enough. I think it's very close. But I'm going to put my bet on this first-time team with something to prove.
And like you said, this is I'm agreeing with you and going just the other way. I think it's going to be I think it's a close matchup that could go either way. But if I had to make a pick, like I'm doing here, I'm going to take the Nigerian team that I think 1 through 11. They've got more than a Bosnia team that I think is a little top heavy. They obviously have Edin Dzeko up front,
right?
World class striker, but it's a Nigerian team that not only looks better on paper when you get deeper in the squad, but it has also performed over the last 2 years. They've won the African Cup of Nations, which, in my opinion, was not a surprise win. I think that was the culmination of a team that's been getting progressively better over the last 2 or 3 years.
But you cannot deny the upside of the Bosnian club. I think if you're talking about, Nigeria is performing at the level, beyond what people expected. And I think that Bosnia has the chance to be a little bit more surprising at this World Cup than Nigeria can be.
And I think that's where you're entirely right. I think Nigeria, while I pick them over Bosnia, we know what we're going to get. Bosnia-Herzegovina still, it's an unknown factor, and we just talked about Group E, and here's where that comes back into play, because if they can advance, the Group F winners, the teams who advance out of Group F will be playing the teams who advance out of Group E, and Bosnia is one of those teams that has such a high upside, and if they get a favorable matchup in the round of 16, if they're able to get through Nigeria, it opens the door for a wealth of possibilities for the first-time tournament.
Wouldn't it be incredible to see a quarterfinal run out of Bosnia-Herzegovina? And it's possible if they get out of the group stage. Right now, according to our picks, they would play France in the round of 16, the Group E winners, and that is not an impossible game at all. So, I cannot wait to watch all of these groups, but there are still a few more. We're also going to take a look at your social media questions and talk about all the stuff that's happening off the field that's garnering attention during this World Cup. Why are people protesting? We'll get to that later. Right after the break, this is What's It To You. Stay right where you are.
Slow down.
Slow down and move over.
And move over.
When you see lights,
vests,
or reflectors,
please give us some room. Slow down and move over.
when you need us,
we've got your back.
You have ours.
You got our back?
You got ours? You got our back?
Please, slow down.
And move over.
My songs know what you did in the dark.
And welcome back to What's It To You's last-minute World Cup preview show. I am Carter Woodiel, and he is Jack Worth. Before we get back to our group-by-group picks, we're going to go to your Facebook questions, or questions from social media. This week's question comes from Katya. She asks, how do you guys feel about the outlash at Brazil hosting the World Cup? And there is a lot of outlash right now. A lot of stuff is going down. We're seeing transit strikes in Sao Paulo over low wages that they believe are too low. We've seen fatalities in building new venues and refurbishing new venues for this World Cup. We've seen some huge crackdowns attempted on drug gangs in slums near Rio and other cities. This whole thing has already cost more than $11 billion to put on and could wind up costing $14 billion by the time it's all said and done. If you want some perspective, the South African World Cup cost less than $4 billion. And the Brazilians are taking to the streets and protesting about this. What's your take?
And, it's a trend that has become far too common over the last 4-6 years, the years in the future, that the World Cup, the Winter Olympics, the Summer Olympics, these huge events that should be a showcase of a city, the showcase of a nation, the showcase of these fantastic athletes, are being overshadowed by the fact that these are events that cost a huge amount of money, that for the most part take part in developing nations whose economy is maybe not prepared to take on this huge debt. And then we've seen 2, 4, 20 years after the tournament is over, you have these massive stadiums that are now sitting empty and are costing the country millions, even billions of dollars.
I think one of the big myths about putting in all of these stadiums is that, well, it'll generate revenue for the whole country. It'll generate tourism dollars. And that's really not all that true. I mean, you look at South Africa, it costs, a fraction of what this Brazilian World Cup has cost. And there was a boost in tourism. There was, it brought in some cash. But looking back 4 years after the fact, not all that much, not enough to justify the whole spectacle. And one thing I will say is that you have to commend the Brazilian people for taking to the streets about this, because it's a soccer crazed nation is a huge understatement in Brazil. That's like if the Super Bowl was held in a different country every year, and it finally came to the United States, and we realized it was costing too much money, so we protested moving it outward. I don't think American fans would react the way the Brazilian fans are reacting right now.
And I agree. And I think to someone who's a casual fan of the sport, and they see that Brazil is hosting the World Cup, yet there's massive public outrage. It's something that at first glance doesn't really make sense, because, like you said, it's a country that has the sport interwoven into its culture, perhaps more than any other in the world, which is certainly saying something. Yet these are citizens that they want to see their 11 on the field do as well as possible, but they understand that the cost might be too high. The cost to their country, the cost to their living, it might be too high to see their guys play at home.
And one of the things that's frustrating about this is that this type of thing can be avoided if the selection process for the World Cup was not as corrupt as it is. I mean, you would really think that the team would not be awarded a bid to host the World Cup if there was a lot of speculation, if there was a potential for prices to skyrocket, if it felt like it was too, if it felt like the country was biting off more than they could chew. But if you look at FIFA, they're certainly not going to care. They're certainly not going to be a good watchdog with regard to that. And that's a really scary thing, because a country's going to do what it wants to do to try and host the World Cup, and often, ignore or not realize just how bad the consequences can be.
And absolutely, we talked about it last week on the show with Qatar hosting the World Cup in 8 years. It's a FIFA selection committee that is not only corrupt, but if they realize these problems are there in the infrastructure, not necessarily what we're going to see on the field. It's a problem that they're not going to bring to light because, again, it doesn't affect them. Mm-hmm. They care about the product on the field. They care about the soccer inside the stadiums. And, that's something that probably won't be affected. And for FIFA, if this tournament goes on like it probably will, with everything inside the stadiums going as planned, it's still a successful tournament from their point of view.
It's a really complicated and difficult scenario to unravel, and we really hope that in future World Cups it's going to get better, though the trend does not look that way right now. Let's get back on the field. Our next group is Group G: Germany, Portugal, Ghana, and the United States of America. Do you think our home country gets out of the group stage?
No. I think they can, but if you're gonna put it, if you're gonna unequivocally ask me that, I have to unequivocally say no. I don't think that the United States is going to progress to the round of 16. I think it's there's a chance, especially the way the games are set up. They play Ghana first, and they play Germany last. So you can say, well, if they get 3 points off the bat against Ghana, and maybe by that third game, Germany's already clinched, and they're sending out some of the subs, and maybe we can squeeze out a draw. I think there's a lot of what if scenarios that could certainly all happen, but more likely will not happen, and we'll see the United States going home after 3 games.
And that's the situation. I mean, you and I both agree that if there's one thing that worked out with the World Cup draw for the USA, and there's not much, but if there's one thing that did, it's the order of play. The fact that they start with Ghana, then move into Portugal, in Manaus, in the middle of the Amazon rainforest, where it's going to be sweltering heat, where it might be easier to pull out a nil-nil draw if they can put everybody back on defense, and then Germany last, like you said. But there are just so many what-ifs in this scenario, and you have to start with the first one. The USA needs 3 points from Ghana. Bottom line, if they're gonna plan on advancing, they need 3 points from Ghana or a miracle in the next 2 matches. And to say the USA, is a lock to beat the team that has knocked them out of the previous 2 World Cups and has proved to be a dangerous opponent time and time again for this United States team, that alone is enough to make me say I have Germany winning and Portugal finishing second, and then all the other what-ifs that come into play. It could certainly happen. I think all of those what-ifs are more likely to happen than not. But one of them, I think, has to go wrong.
And let's even look past Ghana for a second, because like you said, Ghana, it's a very tough game. It's a team that's eliminated the U.S. in the past. The Yanks have had no success against the Black Stars. But even if they do win, which I think they will, you can't count on that 100%. But I think the Americans will beat Ghana.
Yeah, I think so
We're
too.
moving on to they're playing Portugal, who, when Portugal is on form, they are a team that can contend for the trophy. This is one of the best teams in the world if they're on form. If they're not on form, they're still probably better than the United States. And it's once again, it's a Germany team that is arguably the best team in the entire world. So let's say America does get through Ghana. It's hard for me to see a way where they get any points from those next 2 games.
Yeah, it's going to be really, really tough for the Stars and Stripes. We have one more group to talk about, Group H: Belgium, South Korea, Russia, and Algeria.
And from the outside, it does not look like the most compelling of groups, but I'm going to be drawn into Group H because my Cinderella, if you will, of the tournament, the country that I'm really falling in love with before
You really
it starts,
love this country, yeah.
is Belgium. I think they've got a great team. I think it was helped out by the fact that they got a great draw. So if they can notch 9 points, win the group, that does loads for their confidence.
I don't know if they'll do that, but
Well, it's a team that we saw in qualifying, who again had an easy group in qualifying. They steamrolled through the group, and you can say, well, that's because they weren't really challenged. But they're not going to be challenged in Group H. They're going to be the favorite in every game, and it's a team that showed us they can beat the teams they're supposed to. So I'm looking at Belgium to get a hot start in Group H. We'll talk later, but I expect them to continue that through the knockout round. I'm interested who you have coming in second, because it's 3 teams that all could in theory advance.
yeah, Algeria, I just don't think they have the offensive power enough to get past these other teams in the group. But I think South Korea and Russia is a really interesting dynamic to look at, because on the one hand you have a Russian side that's a very stout defensive team, you know what you're going to get from this. And then South Korea, it's similar to what we saw, a little bit earlier with I think it was Japan and Ivory Coast. They're a team where they can beat all 3 teams in this group, and they can lose to all 3 teams in this group. I think Russia is the team to bet on here, just because I feel like they're the more consistent team. But I could see South Korea winning this as well. By winning, I mean finishing second.
And what's interesting is because, like you said, this is similar to what we saw with Japan versus Cote d'Ivoire, with Bosnia, Herzegovina versus Nigeria.
Right.
And on both of those occurrences, you picked the team that we don't know much about.
Right.
That could surprise anyone. And I picked, the steady team that we think we know we're going to get. And here, we're going to disagree the other way.
Wow.
Because I think South Korea is a team that not only can go out and beat Russia, I think it's a team that will go out and beat Russia. It's a Russian team that has not really impressed me, not just in qualifiers, but 2 years ago at the European Championships. And I think it's a South Korean team that it can be overlooked by the world media because they come out of Asia,
Right.
which is not considered, the strong confederation.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like if you're talking about when they play each other, if you're talking about whether or not they're going to win when they face off, because that's obviously going to be extremely important, I feel like Russia's just a very bad matchup for the South Korean team. And I agree with you, like we said earlier in the show, with those two picks you mentioned. It's very close and it's very intriguing. But I think Russia, at the end of the day, is going to be left standing. Let's move past the group. Let's look at your knockout rounds. I want to know who you have in your final four.
So, all right, for my semifinals, I've got Brazil, and I've got Brazil on one half of the final, and I have them beating Spain, which I think it's a consensus final. But my other half of that final is Brazil getting there by beating Germany, and I have Spain advancing to the final. This is my surprise, by beating Belgium in that other semifinal. So I think we've got Brazil, Germany on one side, and then we have Spain and Belgium on the other side, with Brazil and Spain advancing and Brazil lifting the trophy for the 6th time.
That's quite the gutsy pick, and where I disagree with you is you have Belgium knocking off Argentina on your bracket, right?
Yeah.
And I've got Argentina in my final. I think that this is a team that has finally looked at it, and they've gone and said, well, we've got an incredible attack, and that's where we're going to focus our stuff. And you cannot deny, I have Brazil winning the whole thing too. On a neutral field, I might go differently, but the World Cup is not going to be played on a neutral field. The World Cup is going to be played in South America, and home field advantage is a huge factor in soccer. And I think that that's going to give Argentina the boost that they need. I think Germany was in a really great position, but they've had quite a few injuries that have knocked them down a peg. They're a very deep squad, but I don't think they're as good as they could be right now. I think Argentina takes advantage. I think they knock off Belgium, and I think they go all the way to the final before they lose to Brazil.
But I think what's intriguing about that Argentina matchup with Belgium, and here's where I think Belgium is going to excel, because like you said, Argentina has, in all likelihood, the strongest attack out of any nation in the world. They have the world's premier player in Lionel
Absolutely.
Messi. They've got Lavezzi. They've got Higuain. But after that, you look at their midfield and especially their defense, it's a weak team on the back five, even the back eight. And when we look at Belgium, it's a team that in the past you can say, well, they don't have much star power, but they play, collectively well as a team. But now this is a Belgium team that I think does have star power at the front with Eden Hazard, but even especially at the back, which is what you need to neutralize a great team like Argentina. They've got Vincent Kompany in the back, they've got Jan Vertonghen, and they've got Daniel Van Boyten. So if they can be one of the teams that can neutralize Argentina, but they also have the depth up front to score some goals, I think Belgium is a great matchup for Argentina, and I think they are a great team.
And wouldn't that be something if Belgium knocked off mighty Argentina in South America? I don't think it's going to happen, but if it does, it will certainly be a great story, and I'm glad that we agree on who's going to win the whole thing. It will be the host nation, Brazil, lifting the World Cup trophy.
And one quick point on Germany, who a lot of people have progressing. The one issue I have with Germany is that, like you said, it's a deep team, but there isn't a guy up top who, when they need a goal, I think you can point to and say, we're tied 1-1 here in the 88th minute. We need a win. This guy's going to score a goal for us. I don't think Germany has that.
Yeah, they're a very solid team, but you're right, and I think that's something Argentina absolutely has, and they probably have 2 or 3 of those guys right there in their attack. That's all the time we have for you. We hope you enjoy the whole rest of the World Cup as you see all of our predictions be proven wrong over the next month or so. We hope you tune in next time for our final show next week. We're going to take a look back at all the shows that we've had, all the events in sports. Until then, so long from Studio 1A.